You heard the headlines about Russia and Ukraine, but almost nobody tells you where this war truly began. In this video, we'll trace the conflict all the way back to the moment both nations were born from the same ancient city. If you miss this, you never understand why Kiev matters so much today. But once you see the full story, you realize this war isn't just about territory, it's about identity itself. Welcome back to the deep chapter. Now, let's begin.
You think this war started last year? Didn't. It started over 1,000 years ago in Kyiv, a city that once ruled rivers and trade, decided the fate of nations, and left a memory powerful enough to split modern borders. By the end of this video, you'll understand why Kyiv isn't just history. It's the heart of a 1,000-year argument. This is the story of how a riverside settlement became the center of a civilization. We'll follow the Slavic tribes, meet the Varangians, watch Kyiv rise under Oleg, Vladimir, and Yaroslav, feel the buzz of markets, hear the bells of first churches, and watch the slow fracture that led to Mongols at the gates. Along the way, you'll hear legends, real human moments, and surprising details about everyday life. Food, law, music, houses, women, priests, merchants, and soldiers. Stick with me. The deeper you go, the more you see how the past shapes the present. The geography that made a city. The place matters. Kyiv sits on high bluffs above the Dnieper River, where the river cuts deep and wide toward the Black Sea. Rivers were everything in medieval Eastern Europe. The roads, the markets, the lifelines. From the Baltic down through the lands to Byzantium, waterways connected forests and steppes, merchants and emperors. Picture the landscape. Endless dark forests in the north, open grasslands to the south, marshy riverbanks rippling with reeds and stags. Villages hugged the rivers. The Dnieper's current carried boats piled with goods and people, and it also carved pathways of power. Whoever controlled the river routes could tax trade, move armies, and shape alliances. Kiev's position where trade funneled made it magnetic, a center instead of just another stop. The peoples before any state. Before kings and princes, the land was many tribes. Names we hear in chronicles, Polans, Drevlians, Severians, were local groups who farmed, hunted, and gathered. Life was hands-on. Plow the field, mend the net, barter the pelt. Farms were open clearings, and wooden houses clustered around communal fires. Families had roles, men hunted and fought, women ran homes, wove, brewed, and raised kids. Children learned with adults, spin weave, handle an axe, tell a story around the hearth. Religion flowed with the land, people acted to keep the spirits happy. Perun, the god of thunder, was the strong protector. Akash watched women's work. Rivers and trees had spirits, priests or elders kept rituals, burned offerings, and led seasonal festivals. These rites gave rhythm to life. When to plant, when to feast, when to mourn. Trade already linked them. Even before states, people carried furs, beeswax, honey, and sometimes captives, to exchange for salt, iron, and cloth. Traders might travel days or weeks to meet foreign buyers. Towns by rivers swelled during market days. In this world, raids were normal too. The nomads of the steppe sometimes struck. Villages learned to build palisades and to trust speed and stealth. The Varangians, rowers, traders, and rulers. From the north came the Varangians, Scandinavians who sailed in long, narrow ships, skilled at rowing and navigating rivers. To Byzantium, they were valuable as guards and traders. Along the way, they mixed with local peoples. The word Rus likely came from Old Norse for rowers. They had iron tools, ship technology, and a taste for profit. Stories say local tribes asked a Varangian leader, Rurik, to rule them and bring order around 862. Think of it this way. Feuding families and shifting power can get exhausting. An outsider with a disciplined retinue promised justice, and Rurik and his kin were that choice. He settled in Novgorod, far to the north. In his dynasty, the Rurikids, traced authority from their downriver. These Norsemen weren't just conquerors. Many became merchants, marrying local women, learning languages, running trade networks. Their ships plied the Dnieper, and through them timber, furs, and amber flowed south, while silken coins came north. The Varangian presence created a political model. Military leaders with trading interests who could collect tribute and protect routes. Oleg Kyiv and the idea of a capital. Fast forward to Oleg late 9th, early 10th century. Oleg realized Novgorod's power was limited by geography. Kyiv, lower down the Dnieper, sat at the crossroads of trade. He captured Kyiv in 882 and declared it the new political center. This move mattered. The capital concentrates power, rituals, and wealth. Kyiv took the role of symbolic heart. It became not only a trade hub but a place where princes met, laws were pronounced, and faiths were negotiated. Here we must pause for a legend. Chronicles tell of Oleg nailing his shield to the gates of Constantinople after a campaign, as if to say, "We are here, we belong." Legends like this shaped the imagination. Rulers liked the image of bold deeds. Whether exactly true or not, the story signaled Kyiv's ambition. Life in early Kyiv, markets, craft, and houses. What did a person in Kyiv actually see and touch? Imagine markets where traders argued in many tongues. Craftspeople hammered iron for axes and plows, carved wood into spoons and icons, and wove wool into warm cloth. Blacksmiths and coopers were essential. Potters made everyday bowls. Skin and leather workers prepared pelts for sale. Homes were mostly wooden, built with logs and thatch roofs. Wealthier homes had carved beams and painted panels. Streets were muddy in rain and dust in dry times. Food was simple: black bread from rye, soups, porridge, fish from the river, salted meat when available. Mushrooms and berries from the forest, honey sweetened much, grains gave sustenance. Festivities brought out more: mead, rich breads, roasted meats, music, and dance. Music, too, was part of life. Stringed instruments, pipes and drums, accompanied songs about heroes and gods. Storytellers and bards preserved memory. Slavic oral culture was strong.
How?
Poems and tales passed history and values across generations. The Khazar factor in the wider network. To the southeast, the Khazar Khaganate controlled parts of the Volga and acted as a trade middleman. Khazars taxed routes and connected Rus to the Islamic world. Interaction with Khazars mattered. Trade goods moved through their hands. Diplomacy mattered, and sometimes conflict flared. Kiev's rise depended on navigating relationships with neighbors, including steppe powers and Byzantium. Constantinople was at the southern end of the trade artery. Trade with Byzantium brought luxuries and ideas. Byzantine art, icons, and liturgy would have a huge influence later. But long before conversion, Kiev's merchants already handled Byzantine goods. This contact made Kyiv open to new aesthetic and political ideas: law, power, and the Rurikid system. Power in Rus ran through families. The Rurikid dynasty. Leadership was not always a neat father-to-son handover. A mix of hereditary claims, seniority, and raw power played out. To manage the realm, princes established courts, retinues of warriors, druzina, and sometimes formal assemblies. Law grew out of custom, feud settlements, and princely edicts. One important legal development was the Retskaya Pravda, a set of legal customs later codified under Yaroslav. It was not a modern constitution, but it addressed theft, homicide, property disputes, and compensation. Blood feud had limits, and fines became standardized in many cases. Law mattered because it offered predictable outcomes for trade and punishment, both important in a commercial hub. Like Kyiv, the conversion, Vladimir and the baptism of Rus. At the turn of the first millennium, Prince Vladimir faced a strategic choice. Pagan rites maintained tradition, but offered no link to the grand empires around them. Vladimir sought legitimacy and unity. He sent envoys to examine major religions. The story in the primary chronicle says envoys returned from Constantinople, stunned by the beauty of Hagia Sophia. They claimed the liturgy and icons made them feel like they had seen heaven on earth. In 988, Vladimir adopted Byzantine Orthodoxy and ordered mass baptism in the Dnieper. This conversion was not only spiritual, it was political theater. The church supplied administrative tools, literacy, record-keeping, and a clerical class loyal to the prince. Byzantine influence brought architecture, stone churches, domes, icons, ecclesiastical clothing, and writing, the Cyrillic script and Slavic liturgy that would bind the region culturally. A human moment here. Chronicles say Vladimir married a Byzantine princess Anna, further linking Kyiv to imperial ritual. Whether every detail is literal, the political result was clear. Kyiv now joined the Christian Mediterranean world, and this reoriented its culture. Monks, manuscripts, and the rise of literacy. Conversion created monasteries and schools. Monks copied manuscripts, preserved scriptures, and produced the chronicles we rely on today. Monastic centers such as the Kyiv Petyorsk Lavara would become spiritual and cultural hubs. Monks kept records, wrote hagiographies, and compiled genealogies. Literacy, while rare, clustered around the clergy and administration, creating a class able to manage property, legal claims, and international letters. Manuscripts themselves were objects of reverence, illuminated pages, gold leaf, and careful script. These books preserve theology and also law and history. The act of copying texts created continuity of culture across distances. Architecture and art. Stone replaces wood. After conversion, stone architecture began to appear because Christianity favored durable, monumental buildings. St. Sophia's Cathedral in Kyiv, with its golden domes and mosaics, became the visual statement of Christian Kyiv. Churches served worship, but also broadcast political power. Frescoes and icons taught stories visually to a population where literacy was limited. Icon painting developed as a distinct craft. Icons were not just decoration. They were windows into the divine. Workshops trained painters and gilders who used tempera, egg, and powdered pigments to create durable, luminous images. Economy, trade, markets, and currency. Kyiv's wealth relied on trade. Items flowing south included furs, highly prized in Byzantium, wax and honey, slaves and grain. Goods from the Mediterranean, silks, spices, coins, and wine, returned north. Long-distance caravans met river traffic, and Ukrainian artisans sometimes marketed goods as far as Scandinavia. Early coin use in Rus shows influence from Byzantium and Islamic. Land's foreign coins circulated widely before native minting developed. Merchant hubs included marketplaces with stalls where merchants negotiated price. Trust was built through reputation, and credit sometimes circulated via merchant networks. Hoard finds. Caches of coins and silver found in archaeological digs show Kyiv's participation in large-scale trade. Hoards often represent savings, emergency stash, or ritual deposits. These finds help archaeologists date trade vigor and outside connections. Social structure, elites, commoners, and bonded peoples. Kyiv's society had layers. The prince and Druzhina made up the ruling elite. They lived in palaces, rode with retinues, and controlled tribute. Below them were merchants and artisans, the urban backbone. Farmers and herders made up the bulk, responsible for food production. There were also servants and bonded people, a spectrum from hired laborers to those in servile conditions. Women played key roles, running households, weaving cloth, managing stores, and often controlling local exchange. Noble women could influence diplomacy. Remember Yaroslav's daughters married into European courts, which shows women's significance in dynastic politics. Slavery existed, and it fueled some trade. Captives could be sold or integrated, their status varied. The economy was complex and interdependent. Warfare and defense, drums, spears, and fortresses. War in Rus mixed local force with borrowed tactics. Druzhina were elite warriors who fought mounted or on foot. Varangians served as heavy fighters and bodyguards in many courts. Fortifications took forms from wooden palisades to stone towers. Fortified hilltops, Gorodish, protected settlements. Army logistics relied on seasonal campaigns, summer raids and winter defenses. Nomads of the steppe, Pechenegs and Cumans, used speed and horse archery to raid and test Rus defenses. Diplomacy sometimes included marriage or tribute to keep raids at bay. When conflicts grew, coalitions formed, sometimes bringing ships along rivers for combined attacks. The rota system and fragmentation. A structural issue shaped Rus' fate: succession rules. The appanage or rota system distributed lands among princes, often rotating seniority. While intended to keep peace, it It fostered competition. Sons and cousins fought for more prestigious seats like Kyiv in the 11th and 12th centuries. The realm fragmented into principalities: Novgorod, Chernigov, Pereyaslav, Vladimir Suzdal, Halak-Volhynia, and more. Each gained local identity, weakening the central authority of Kyiv. Novgorod in the north developed a merchant-driven identity with Vech assembly elements. In contrast, the northeast around Vladimir adopted princely centralization. Westwards, lands grew close to Poland and Hungary, forming different legal and cultural ties. These divergent paths made the idea of a single Rus political center fragile. Yaroslav the Wise, law, diplomacy, and culture. Yaroslav, early 11th century, epitomized Kiev's cultural peak. He balanced warfare and diplomacy, marrying children into European dynasties. A smart move that placed Kyiv in royal networks from France to Norway. His Ruskaya Pravda tried to limit blood feud by standardizing fines and compensations. That mattered because stable commerce needed laws people could trust. Under Yaroslav, churches, schools, and libraries flourished. Chronicles began to be written down, encouraged architecture and learning. St. Sophia rose as a civic and spiritual anchor. Yaroslav's reign shows how a ruling elite could foster institutions that outlast their lives, human stories and small anecdotes. History is full of small human moments that make it feel alive. Imagine a Kyiv merchant named Mikola, who sailed his boat to Constantinople, haggled for a bolt of silk, then smuggled a tiny icon back to be hung over his stove. Or Princess Anastasia, who learned to read a little and asked a monk to copy a prayer book for her children. Or a carpenter who carved a wooden palisade to keep marauders out, only to be paid in salt because currency was scarce that month. There's also the revenge story of Princess Olga. Medieval chronicles tell that when her husband Igor was killed by Drevlians demanding tribute, Olga reacted with brutal cunning. She trapped Drevlians and burned their leaders. Whether every detail is literal, the tale shaped how later rulers were expected to respond to insult or rebellion. Such stories painted moral lessons and justified strong princely action. The Mongol shadow, prelude to catastrophe. While internal strife weakened Rus, the Mongol Empire grew in the east. In 1223, the Rus coalition faced Mongols at the Kalka River and were badly beaten. The Mongols weren't simply a cavalry threat. They were a new military machine with discipline, intelligence, networks, and logistics. Their campaigns smashed cities and reorganized political maps across Eurasia. Kyiv tried to resist, but in 1240 Bataq Khan's forces broke through. The city suffered destruction and heavy loss of life. Stone monuments might survive, but wooden homes, markets, and people were devastated. The Mongol conquest ended Kiev's role as a unified political center and pushed power northeast. After Kyiv fell, diverging paths. Post-1240, the map shifted. The Grand Duchy of Lithuania expanded into western Rus lands, bringing Polish influence later on. Northern Russian principalities slowly reoriented around Moscow, a small town that grew by learning to be useful to the Mongols. Collecting tribute and building administrative skills, over time, Moscow centralized power and claimed the legacy of Rus. Culturally, the Orthodox Church remained a unifying element across fragmented lands. Language and liturgy kept much of the memory alive. The idea of Kyiv as a sacred origin persisted in chronicles and in people's memory. Over centuries, the different successor states would remember Kyiv as a source of legitimacy, which makes the city symbolic today. Language, chronicle, and historical memory. The primary chronicle, compiled in the 12th century and later edited, is our main early source. It mixes fact, legend, liturgy, and retrospective interpretation. That means historians must read it cautiously. It preserves many details, but also frames events to serve liturgical or political points. Archaeology helps test and expand written records, dig sites, pottery styles, hoards, and building foundations confirm or correct the chronicle. Language-wise, Old East Slavic evolved. The introduction of Cyrillic and Slavic liturgy standardized written communication. Over centuries, dialects diverged, giving rise to Ukrainian, Belarusian, and Russian languages with shared roots. That common root is why Kyiv's legacy can be claimed by multiple modern groups. gender, family, and marriage as diplomacy. Women in Kyiv had roles beyond home. Noble women formed marriage alliances. Yaroslav's daughters married into European royal families, and these marriages created ties that boosted Kyiv's prestige. Women could manage estates, influence courtly decisions, and run households that were economic units. Monasteries offered alternative roles for widows and devout women, and some became patrons of art and learning. Family networks were political networks. Marriages created obligations and protection. Princes routinely used marriage to secure alliances or peace. So a princess's life could have huge geopolitical ripple effects. The artisans, crafts, and material culture. Kyiv's artisans produced ceramics, metalwork, textiles, and icons. Icons used pigments like lapis for blue, cinnabar for red, and gold leaf to set images glowing. Pottery styles changed over time. Archaeologists use them to date layers. Textiles dyed with natural dyes like woad for blue or madder for red indicated status. Metalwork, belt buckles, harness fittings, and weapons showed both local style and foreign influence. These objects showed daily life and contact networks. Byzantine-style brooch in a Kyiv grave signals trade and taste. A hoard with Islamic dirhams signals wide connections. Material culture ties Kyiv into a broad Eurasian web. Money, credit, and merchant trust. Before state mints, foreign coins circulated. Over time, local coinage appears. Merchants built reputations. A trustworthy trader could borrow or arrange credit. Trust networks mattered more than state banking. Guild-like associations protected crafts and ensured quality. Contracts might be sealed with oaths, witnesses, and religious symbols. Markets had rules, timetables, weights, and measures that facilitated trade across language barriers. Food, health, and medicine. Diet was peasant and fish-based for many. Rye bread, porridge, smoked fish, salted meats, and dairy were staples. Spices were rarities, so flavors were local. Preservation mattered. Smoking, salting, and drying allowed food to move and store across seasons. Healthcare relied on herbal knowledge, monks' remedies, and practical midwifery. Epidemics could devastate populations. Medical knowledge was limited but practical. Music, poetry, and oral memory songs told history. Epics recounted hero deeds. Laments saved memory after defeat. Bards and storytellers were oral historians. Music used flutes, lyres, and simple string instruments. These forms carried identity and moral lessons. Even when political power shifted, oral traditions reinforced a shared past. The moral of the story: why Kyiv still matters. Kyiv's story is not just trivia, it shaped identity. For Ukrainians, Kyiv is the proof of a long-standing local political and cultural center. For Russians, Kyiv is the starting point of an Orthodox civilizational narrative. Those dual claims make Kyiv more than land. It is symbol, memory, and legitimacy. That's why modern politics can't ignore medieval history. A city's past becomes a political resource. Monuments, churches, saints' days, all these carry memory and authority. Competing national stories both draw from the same medieval well, and those stories fuel modern claims over territory and identity. Archaeology versus chronicle, evidence that grounds the tale. Archaeologists dig layers. They find pottery, church foundations, coin hoards, and burnt layers that match written accounts of destruction. Hoards of Islamic silver, Byzantine coins, and local buckles show trade. Church foundations and fragments of mosaics point to Christian art. The archaeological map shows urban expansion in the 10th-11th centuries and wide destruction layers in the 13th, supporting the narrative of flourishing then catastrophe. Historians cross-check evidence. If the Chronicle says a major building stood by a date, archaeologists test for foundations. If an invasion is recorded, burn layers or mass graves may corroborate. Still, not every legend is literal. Olga's revenge, Vladimir's debate of religions. These are narrative frames that carry meaning even if details blur, long shadow into modern times. Names, saints, liturgies, and topography survive. Kyiv's churches, when rebuilt, echo the old forms. Cultural memory passed through liturgy and chronicles kept the idea of Kyiv alive. Centuries of different political arrangements: Lithuanian, Polish, Ottoman, Russian, Soviet, layered new elements onto old memories. But the idea of Kyiv as the mother city continued to shape national imaginations. Modern nationalism in the 19th-20th centuries reread medieval history for political use. Historians and politicians emphasize different parts: language, law, church ties, or princely continuity. That reinterpretation made medieval Kyiv part of modern identity construction. The river carries memory. Stand on the Dnieper at dawn and listen. The river still carries sound across time. Barges and ferries have replaced longships, but trade and movement continue. Caves, stones, and domes are palimpsests, layers of building, burning, rebuilding. That layered history is the city's power. It's a place that gave rise to law, faith, diplomacy, and cultural ties. It also gave rise to disagreement about who owns the past. That disagreement echoes loudly in the politics of our day. Kyiv made rulers, and rulers made claims. Those claims did not vanish with conquest. They transformed into stories, saints, and law. For anyone trying to understand the Russia-Ukraine conflict, you must start here. Not because ancient dates are fate, but because the memory of Kyiv provides tools for modern legitimacy. People still reach back to this moment, and when they do, they change what happens next. Kyiv rose from river trade and tribal life to become the heart of Kievan Rus. It adopted Christianity under Vladimir, reached cultural heights under Yaroslav, fractured through succession rules and economic shifts, and suffered Mongol devastation. Yet Kiev's religious, legal, and cultural legacy lived on, seeding the identities of later states. The city's past still fuels present claims, making it central to how both Ukrainians and Russians understand themselves.
From humble tribes on the Dnieper to the dazzling golden age under Yaroslav, and finally, the devastation of the Mongols, Kyiv's journey shows why it has always been more than just a city. It's the birthplace of nations and a symbol that still matters today. This is the Deep Chapter, where history runs deep. If you found this story meaningful, subscribe, like, and share your thoughts in the comments. I'll see you in the next chapter.